Sisters, brothers, comrades, delegates, guests, and staff, the 2 years since our last convention have been truly remarkable ones for the working class, for the labor movement, and especially for our union. Large sections of the working class have realized that there is no savior, no politician, and certainly no employer or corporation that is going to provide us with decent wages and benefits, protect our rights, or address the existential threat of climate change. Workers, especially younger workers, are realizing that they have to do the hard work of self-organization. And they are realizing that they need to use, or be willing to use, our ultimate power, which is the power to withhold our labor, to strike. Thus, we have chosen Building Strike Power as the theme of our convention. The reasons for this increasing militancy are not hard to understand. During the pandemic, our employers made it clear that while they consider many of us essential, meaning we had to go to work during a deadly pandemic, they also consider us expendable. As the pandemic eased and inflation began eating into our paychecks, the federal government and corporate media blamed workers' wages and government programs that benefited working people for inflation. They repeatedly raised interest rates in a transparent effort to bring down wages by causing a recession and throwing people out of work. Meanwhile, corporate profits, which had already reached record levels during the pandemic, continued to soar. Executives were richly rewarded with bonuses and stock buybacks, yet workers have had to fight like hell for a share of the profits made off of our labor. A case in point, Wabtec spent over $1 billion on stock buybacks over the past 4 years, yet it took a 10-week strike for them to settle a fair contract with the members of UE Locals 506 and 618. The attacks on working people have come from multiple directions. The right-wing Supreme Court threw nearly half a century of settled law out of the window when they overturned Roe v. Wade in 2022. A woman's right to choose to terminate a pregnancy now depends on what state she lives on and whether she has the time and resources to travel to another state. Not surprisingly, the states with the most restrictive laws are also those with the most anti-union policies and the lowest wages. In the past year, the Supreme Court has also issued decisions curtailing the rights of people of color, of LGBTQ people, of students, and of workers. People of color, particularly black people, continue to face violence at the hands of both the police and self-styled vigilantes. Across the country, the boogeyman of critical race theory is used to prevent any honest reckoning with racial injustice, with Florida going so far as to promote a curriculum that insinuates that slavery benefited black people. Over the past 2 years, we have also seen a wave of coordinated legislative attacks on LGBTQ plus people, especially trans people. Some of the most dangerous and barbaric of these bills ban medically necessary care. They have been condemned by the American Medical Association and are putting tens of thousands of people at higher risks of suicide and self-harm. Most of these attacks are being promoted by opportunistic Republican politicians. They know that their economic agenda of busting unions, lowering wages, gutting regulations, and massive tax cuts for corporations and the wealthy is not popular. And so they seek to win and maintain office by waging an increasingly nasty culture war. Unfortunately, the corporate stranglehold on much of the Democratic Party means that they offer little in the way of an alternative. Instead of putting forward a bold program of raising wages, creating jobs, supporting unions, and protecting our rights, too many Democrats simply campaign on being not as bad as Republicans, which makes it easy to attack them as out-of-touch elites. While Republican attacks on our union, civil, and human rights are so extreme that we often have no choice but to hold our noses and vote for Democrats, it is not hard to see why many of our fellow working people either fall for right-wing demagoguery or simply stay home on election day. The near vacuum of political leadership is not only a danger to our pocketbooks, but to our very ability to continue to live on this planet. The extreme weather events that we have seen just this past summer include record heat waves across the South, Southwest, and Midwest, smoke from Canadian wildfires forcing people inside throughout the Northeast and Midwest, devastating flooding in Vermont, deadly wildfires in Hawaii, and the first tropical storm in 84 years counting in California. However, instead of promoting global cooperation to tackle this global problem, our government, under presidents from both parties, has for more than a decade pursued a dangerous foreign policy based on escalating tensions with both China and Russia. Despite the sharp nationalist rhetoric, this new Cold War is primarily a reflection of competition between some of the largest corporations in the world. Increased geopolitical tensions also serve to justify ever-increasing military spending, claiming resources that can and should instead go to helping the working class. This new Cold War became hot in February of last year, with Russia's unconscionable invasion of Ukraine. The Pentagon documents that were leaked in April have made it clear that the U.S. military does not consider the war in Ukraine winnable. Nonetheless, our government, despite its own bleak assessment, is pushing for the war to continue in order to wear down Russia and feed the U.S. military-industrial complex at the expense of hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian and Russian lives. It is past time for the U.S. to push diplomatic talks to end this war. While shocking, none of this comes as a surprise to those of us in UE. Our history, our philosophy, our brand of them and us unionism teaches us that our interests as workers are fundamentally opposed to the interests of our employers, and that employers will use whatever tools they can to divide us and keep us from claiming the wealth that our labor produces. And it also shows us the way forward for working people, which is to unite all workers on the basis of rank and file control and engage in aggressive struggle to improve our conditions. And working people across the country are increasingly embracing our ideas. Over the past year, members of two of the largest unions in the country, the Teamsters and the UAW, elected new leadership who vowed to engage in aggressive struggle. In negotiations this year, both of these unions carried out militant contract campaigns and built strike power. A credible strike threat at UPS won historic gains for their members in the largest private sector union contract in the country. As we meet today, the UAW has begun an unprecedented strike against all of the big three auto companies at the same time. On Friday, the UE General Executive Board issued a statement of solidarity with the UAW strikers who are standing up for the entire working class. That same day, members of UE Local 770 making their way here from Indiana for this convention stopped off in Toledo, Ohio to show solidarity at the auto worker picket line, followed a day later by some of our newest members coming in from Chicago, from the University of Chicago and Northwestern University. All right. This is a practice all unions need to emulate. The settlement at UPS and a victory at the Big Three will have positive impacts on bargaining for all of us, pushing up standards for workers across the whole economy. This rising spirit of working class militancy has yet to find a coherent or consistent political expression. And at the national level, our nation's politics continue to be defined by increasingly sharp rhetorical divisions between the two corporate parties, neither of which is interested in uniting the working class. But working class champions are emerging in some places, running and winning on a clear working class program. You heard two of them, Mayor Ed Gainey and Congresswoman Summer Lee yesterday, and Sister Gates from the Chicago Teachers Union told you about the independent political formation built in Chicago, which earlier this year elected a mayor from the labor movement, Brandon Johnson. The success of these candidates demonstrates that where candidates run on a clear working class program, of raising wages and providing health care for all, of supporting unions and making sure everyone has housing, of raising people up instead of locking them up, they can win. This is a moment of incredible potential for the working class and for the labor movement. And no union has done more to take advantage of this moment than your union, UE. As you will hear over the course of this week, UE members from coast to coast have been using the leverage that workers currently have in the labor market to win historic wage increases, often in the double digits. In keeping with our convention's theme of building strike power, many locals have backed up their demands with credible strike threats, from Local 228 in New Hampshire, to Locals 1123 and 1137 in Illinois, to Local 1008 in Laguna Niguel, California. In Valencia, California, the 700 members of Local 1004 engaged in a one-day unfair labor practice strike against their employer, Henry Mayo Memorial Hospital, in March of this year, the first strike ever by that local. To achieve a better settlement of the new 3-year agreement and also breathe new life into their local union. Less than 2 weeks ago in Durham, North Carolina, solid waste workers for the city walked off the job, demanding that the city make up for recent inflation and the 2 years of the pandemic during which they did not receive step increases. We're going to hear later, and in fact see in a little while, more about the courageous fight. But I want to note that these are public sector workers who are legally barred from striking in that state. But they stood down anyway and are well on their way to winning their demands. If you follow the rules, the problem in this country is the last rule is workers lose. And so we have to be prepared to break the rules.
That's right.
In Pennsylvania, the members of Locals 506 and 618 struck Wagtech corporations for 70 days. It was the second longest strike in those locals' history. Months of careful preparation, exemplary leadership, and constant communication with the membership made for a spirited, unified strike, with only a small handful of their 1,400 members crossing the picket line. The locals' principled stand on behalf of the future of the entire working class earned our members the complete support of the Erie community, backing from virtually all of the statewide elected officials in Pennsylvania, solidarity from local, regional, and national labor, faith, and environmental organizations and leaders, and national attention in the press. After 10 weeks on the picket line, they won a new agreement with significant improvements. UE's contribution to the fight against climate change, the Green Locomotive Project, continues to be a model for how the labor movement can fight for good jobs in a sustainable future. And Local 506's leadership of this project helped bring significant support to their strike. Who work as rail crew drivers, with community allies who organize in the working class communities adjacent to rail yards, and with our members who build locomotives and locomotive parts, to demand that the railroads invest in modern, clean, green locomotives. By reducing emissions, the use of green locomotives will clean up the pollution that threatens the health of rail yard workers and rail yard communities, and by increasing demand for new locomotives, it will create thousands of new, good union jobs in Erie and elsewhere. Most importantly for the future of our union, this moment has brought tens of thousands of new workers into our ranks. As you will hear later today during the organizing report, close to 25,000 graduate workers at 9 universities across the country have joined our union since the last convention. These mostly young workers are choosing to join UE because of our principles, because of our rank and file democracy, because we unite all workers regardless of race, gender, sexuality, or gender identity. Because of our commitment to international working class solidarity. Because we maintain political independence. And because we are willing to engage in aggressive struggle, including building strike power. And they are building their locals in the best way possible, by workers organizing other workers, just as was done when UWE was built in the 1930s, and the only way that the labor movement can hope to rebuild at the scale needed to fully take on corporate power. Over the past year and a half, I worked with one of these groups of workers, UWE Local 256, MIT-GSU, at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, to bargain their first contract. They are an amazing addition to our union. They are principled, they are militant, and just last week, their willingness to build strike power secured a tentative agreement that is setting new standards for graduate workers nationwide. Yeah. Every generation of UWE has faced challenges, from the enormous task of organizing the electrical manufacturing industry in the first place, to the red baiting attacks of the 1940s and 1950s, to the deindustrialization of the last 4 decades. Each generation has met their obligation to preserve UWE as a fighting union, a beacon of hope for workers, not only in our own country, but across the world. Now it is our turn. Because of the hard work that each and every one of you has put in every day to build and sustain our union, we now have a clear path forward to UWE gaining the capacity and resources needed to help lead the struggle on behalf of the entire working class. Who are we? UWE! Who are